Tonight we begin with the glow of a fire that flickers in a way no light bulb can ever quite imitate. The shadows stretch tall along the bark walls, bending and curling, like they're trying to join in the conversation. You're sitting cross-legged on a soft blanket, the crackle of the wood giving off tiny sparks, and the warmth seeps into your skin after a long day of trudging through the noise of modern life. It's quiet here, so quiet, in fact, that you realize you can hear your own heartbeat. You probably won't survive this in the sense of returning to your buzzing phone and endless notifications the same person. Something in you is about to shift, just a little, and it starts with a whisper and a flame. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You notice the storykeeper leaning close to the fire, hands folded loosely, his face lined not with age but with memory. His breath matches the rhythm of the flames, slow and steady. There's no grand announcement, no welcome, friend sign, but simply the presence of someone whose role is to keep words alive. He doesn't begin with a rush. He begins with silence, and the silence itself is the first ritual. Your eyes trace the room. Bundles of herbs hang from the rafters, their silhouettes swaying gently as if nodding approval. A small pot simmers on a stone, its scent faintly sweet, wild mint, you think, maybe a dash of cedar needles. Historians still argue whether the Cherokee intentionally paired certain herbs with stories for medicinal effect, or if it was just happy coincidence, but the smell is grounding either way. It pulls you deeper into the present moment, like an invisible hand pressing your shoulders down into relaxation. The keeper shifts slightly, tossing another log onto the fire. Sparks fly up, quick and fleeting, and you can't help but imagine each spark as a tiny spirit racing skyward. That's not far from how these gatherings were seen, fire as a living bridge between worlds, a reminder that you're never telling a story to people alone, you're telling it with the ancestors and the land listening too. Your ears pick up on the first sound besides the crackle, a soft hum. Not a melody you could ever whistle on command, more like the kind of hum you make when your body knows a tune but your brain doesn't. It rolls low, vibrating through your chest as though the fire is humming with him. You shift slightly on the blanket, wondering how long you could sit here without saying a word, just breathing with this rhythm. It's funny, modern people pay for sound baths, guided meditations, noise-cancelling apps. And here, centuries ago, the same effect is happening for free. Hum, flame, hush, repeat. You could package this and call it Firelight Vibes Deluxe and probably sell subscriptions. Joke aside, the real subscription here is being present. The keeper opens his hand toward the flames, palm hovering above the heat as if greeting an old friend. His fingers twitch lightly, and for a moment you're convinced he's tracing the edges of the fire like a sculptor shaping clay. You lean closer, realizing that the ritual isn't in the fire itself but in the way he acknowledges it, slow, deliberate, respectful. Fire keeps you warm, cooks your food, clears the fields. Fire can also turn forests to ash if mishandled. The ritual is a reminder, you don't own fire, you walk alongside it. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. Some old accounts describe how embers were sometimes carried from one dwelling to another in turtle shells, tucked safely under moss. Imagine that, borrowing fire like sugar from a neighbor, except your sugar could burn down the village if you tripped. It sounds absurd, but the trust placed in that careful act was part of community life. The storykeeper leans back, his eyes glinting orange, and finally speaks. The voice isn't booming, it's low and even, as if he's been waiting all this time for you to lean in. The fire remembers, he says. Just 3 words, but they land heavier than any TED Talk opener you've ever heard. You can't help but smile at the thought of a modern keynote speaker trying to match that gravitas. He lets the sentence dangle, stretching into silence again. You feel the tension, the pull of wanting more, but also the odd comfort that not every silence must be filled. In this moment, you're learning the first calming ritual: to sit by the hearth, let the world shrink to shadows and sparks, and accept that you don't need to rush to the next thing. The air smells slightly different now, sharper, like pine resin catching in the heat. You breathe deeply, and it's as if your lungs are finally catching up to your body. The keeper closes his eyes, his hum softening into near breath. His hand rises, pointing toward the dark ceiling beams, where smoke threads its way upward like a winding story itself. You catch yourself thinking, this isn't just about listening, it's about remembering. Remembering that every culture, yours included, once sat like this, firelit, swapping tales not because Netflix failed to load but because words and warmth are what make you human. That little reality check stings in the best way. And so the first ritual is complete: fire, silence, presence. You sit, entranced, realizing the night is just beginning, and the storykeeper hasn't even started the story yet. He doesn't need to rush after all, the fire is patient, and now, so are you. The storykeeper shifts, and the air thickens with the faint aroma of tobacco. Not the stale kind that clings to your uncle's jacket, but something richer, earthier, sacred. The leaf isn't rolled into a cigarette or stuffed into a pipe for habit, it's crumbled with care, pinched between fingers as if it were starlight turned solid. You watch closely as he holds it toward the fire, the tiny pieces glowing before they burn, curling into spirals of smoke that drift upward like quiet prayers. The Cherokee use of tobacco has always been about reverence, not recreation. It's a connector, a way of opening a line to the unseen world. Think of it as ancient Wi-Fi, invisible signals rising into the sky, carrying intention instead of data packets. Mainstream historians agree tobacco was among the most sacred plants in the southeastern woodlands, but they still argue whether it was smoked primarily in pipes, sprinkled onto embers, or even offered whole to streams and stones. What's clear is that it was never about the nicotine buzz, it was about respect, reciprocity, and conversation with forces bigger than yourself. You lean in, watching the smoke curl. It doesn't just rise, it dances, weaving in and out of itself as though it has choreography. You could swear it's writing something in the air, letters you can't read but your body somehow understands. The storykeeper exhales softly, not in a rush but in a steady stream, guiding the smoke with his hand. The gesture isn't grand. It's almost casual, like flipping through a well-loved book you've already read a dozen times. And then he chuckles, a low sound that rumbles from his chest. The smoke knows more than we do, he says, and for a fleeting second you imagine the smoke rolling its eyes, muttering, finally, they're paying attention. You laugh under your breath, half at the thought and half because the atmosphere has softened enough to let a smile slip through. A quirky tidbit slides into your mind: early European settlers were baffled at how sacred tobacco was treated. They wrote accounts of Cherokee men using small pipes to blow smoke not just into the air but into water, onto corn seeds, or even into the ears of the sick. To them it looked bizarre, maybe even comical, but to the Cherokee it was as serious as surgery. You can't help but picture some 17th century onlooker squinting, notebook in hand, trying to make sense of a ceremony by scribbling weird smoke habits while completely missing the point. The fire pops loudly, as if punctuating the moment. Sparks leap up, catching the smoke trails for a heartbeat before vanishing. You blink, realizing your eyes are following the patterns as if it were slow-motion fireworks. The room feels alive now, not busy, not overwhelming, but breathing. The smoke joins the fire, the herbs in the rafters sway, and the keeper's hum threads it all together. You catch the subtle rhythm: pinch, offer, burn, spiral. The repetition itself is calming. It's almost hypnotic, like those meditation apps that loop waves crashing on a shore, except here, the waves are spirals of smoke dissolving into the dark rafters. You wonder how many times this gesture has been repeated over centuries. Thousands. Millions. Enough that your lungs feel oddly honored just to breathe in a trace of it. The storykeeper leans closer, lowering his voice. The smoke carries what we cannot speak. You nod, even though you're not entirely sure what that means. But it clicks a moment later. Some feelings don't fit into words. Grief too heavy, joy too big, gratitude too complicated. So you hand it to the smoke, and the smoke knows where to take it. It's oddly comforting, like outsourcing your emotions to a courier service with no delivery fee. A memory surfaces. Someone once wrote that tobacco was placed in running water as an offering before a journey. Imagine stepping into a canoe, the mist still clinging to the river, pausing just long enough to let a leaf drift away with the current. It's a promise, between you, the water, and whatever lies ahead, that you'll travel with respect. There's something soothing about that, especially in a world where most of us start trips by shoving chargers into backpacks and cursing at boarding passes. You take a slow breath, almost tasting the air. It doesn't sting. It doesn't choke. It simply fills you, faintly sweet and sharp all at once. You close your eyes for a moment and picture the smoke rising through the roof beams, slipping into the night, blending with the stars overhead. The Cherokee believed the smoke could carry prayers skyward to the Creator, a cosmic delivery system that never once misplaced a package. Historians still argue whether tobacco was universally available to all Cherokee or restricted mainly to priests and healers. Some sources describe it as everyday sacredness, like bread or salt, while others insist it was guarded for only the most significant rituals. The debate lingers, but in this moment, it doesn't matter. The storykeeper's quiet offering feels both ordinary and extraordinary, as if the line between sacred and daily life is blurred on purpose. The ritual slows. He brushes his palms together, not to clean them but as if sealing the act. The smoke thins, disappearing into the rafters until only the fire's glow remains. You feel a shift inside you, subtle but undeniable, like something heavy has been set down without you realizing you were carrying it. And in that hush, you realize the second calming ritual has worked its way into your bones. You don't need to control every prayer, every thought, every weight on your chest. You can hand some of it to the smoke, let it rise, and trust it knows where to go. The storykeeper rises slowly, his knees cracking in a way that reminds you he's lived more winters than you have, though he seems amused by the sound instead of annoyed. He walks with quiet steps toward the edge of the lodge, where a shallow wooden bowl rests on a low platform. Inside, water gleams faintly in the firelight, reflecting the flames in ripples that shiver with each movement in the room. Next to it, you notice a cluster of smooth river stones, gray and speckled, stacked neatly as if they've been waiting for their turn. He doesn't rush. One by one, he lifts the stones, his thumb brushing each surface as if reacquainting himself with an old friend. The first stone he places in the water with a muted splash. Ripples spread outward, catching firelight and scattering it into glimmering patterns across the ceiling. It's mesmerizing, like watching sunlight fracture on a lake at dawn, except here you're sitting in darkness, pulled into the slow rhythm of stone and water. The Cherokee have long recognized stones as keepers of memory. Mainstream fact, in many traditions, stones are described as oldest beings, witnesses to everything that has passed, simply because they endure when almost nothing else does. And water, of course, is life itself, always moving, shaping valleys, nourishing crops, and reflecting the moon. When you put them together, you're not just playing with pebbles in a bowl. You're staging a quiet conversation between permanence and flow. He adds another stone. The sound is soft but distinct, plop, ripple, shimmer. Then another. You find yourself holding your breath to match the timing, exhaling only when the water settles. The repetition becomes ritual, soothing in its predictability. You think about how oddly comforting it would be if modern stress management workshops included gently plop rocks in water until your boss emails you less. Honestly, it might work. A quirky tidbit, Some Cherokee stories describe how the world itself was once covered entirely by water, until animals dove down to bring up mud, which eventually formed land. In that myth, a tiny water beetle is the hero, carrying the first clump of earth on its back. It's humbling. Imagine crediting a beetle instead of a thunder god. Historians still argue whether such stories were told primarily for children or if they carried hidden cosmological codes for adults, but either way, the message sticks. Even the smallest act, even the tiniest creature, can ripple outward into creation. You stare at the bowl, half expecting the water to tell its own story. In a way, it does. Each ripple catches the firelight differently, sending tiny golden snakes slithering across the wooden walls. For a moment, you forget you're indoors. It feels like you're surrounded by a riverbank at dusk, the water alive, the stones patient. The storykeeper dips his fingers into the bowl, lifting a handful of water. He lets it drizzle slowly back in, drop by drop. The sound is delicate, almost inaudible, but you hear it anyway, plink, plink, plink. He smiles faintly, as though amused that water, which can roar in floods or carve canyons, is also capable of being this gentle. You can't help but think of how humans could take a note from that, less canyon-carving anger, more drizzle. He looks toward you, eyes reflecting the ripple light, and says softly, "The stone teaches patience, the water teaches change." You nod, because there's not much else to do but nod. The words sink in like pebbles dropping into your own chest, sending ripples through your thoughts. You wonder how often you try to be stone when you should be water, or water when you need to be stone. It's a calming, humbling kind of confusion. The ritual continues with silence, as if explanation would only ruin the lesson. Another stone is placed. Another ripple spreads. You notice your shoulders have dropped, your jaw unclenched without you commanding it. The rhythm has worked its way into you. Wait, release, ripple, settle. The quirky beetle myth returns to mind, and you can't resist smiling at the thought of that tiny bug swimming determinedly through cosmic waters, unknowingly rewriting history with a speck of mud. You picture it wearing little goggles and a world's strongest beetle t-shirt, and you stifle a laugh. Humor slips in easily here, like a friend poking you in the ribs during a too serious meeting, and the calm doesn't break, it deepens. Historians still argue whether water and stone rituals like this were meant only for private healing ceremonies or whether they were common in evening gatherings. What's certain is that the combination has echoed across generations, stones carried to council houses, bowls filled at rivers, ripples telling more than words could. At last, the keeper lowers his hands, letting the water still completely. The surface flattens, and for the first time all night, the fire reflects as a perfect mirror. The stones rest at the bottom, heavy and certain, like secrets held safely. He leans back, exhaling with the quiet satisfaction of a task completed, not flashy, not grand, just steady. And you realize the third calming ritual has found its way into you. Balance doesn't come from choosing stone or water, stillness or motion. It comes from letting them sit together, ripple against permanence, permanence against ripple, until the reflection is whole. The storykeeper closes his eyes, and his hand rises slowly, palm outward, fingers loose, like he's reaching not for something but toward something. The fire pops softly behind him, and you realize his arm is tracing a pattern, a compass of sorts. First to the east, then south, west, north. He pauses at each point, as if greeting an invisible guest. But he doesn't stop at 4. His hand lifts skyward, then lowers toward the earth, and finally it rests over his chest. 7 directions: east, south, west, north, above, below, within. The room seems to shift with every gesture. When he points east, you feel the faint tug of dawn in your chest, a reminder of new beginnings. South carries warmth, growth, the pull of summer fields. West feels heavier, like sunset, endings, and reflection. North is crisp, steady, the direction of wisdom and ancestors. Above stretches infinite, below roots you deep, and within reminds you that no compass works unless you include yourself. Mainstream fact: Cherokee cosmology often invokes the sacred number 7. 7 clans, 7 directions, 7 ceremonies that marked the rhythm of communal life. Historians still argue whether the 7-point invocation was practiced daily or reserved for special moments, but the number's significance is carved into oral tradition like grooves into river stone. You watch his movements, slow and steady, and you start to feel the pattern in your own body. It's less like a compass and more like a grounding exercise. You could imagine doing this before a job interview or while waiting in line at the DMV, just muttering, east, south, west, north, above, below, within under your breath. It beats scrolling aimlessly on your phone. He whispers something in Cherokee, a soft phrase that slips past your understanding but still feels like it lands somewhere meaningful. You don't need translation to sense the intention, acknowledgement, respect, connection. Every gesture pulls you a little further from your buzzing daily life and a little deeper into a world that feels whole. A quirky tidbit flickers through your mind. Some old accounts mention how warriors painted their bodies with colors corresponding to these directions: red for east, black for west, white for south, blue for north. Imagine stepping onto a battlefield not just armed with weapons but literally wrapped in geography, carrying the map of the world painted on your skin. You wonder how intimidating that must have looked, like facing not a single opponent but an entire cosmos in human form. The keeper's hand drifts downward again, resting over his heart. He doesn't rush the moment, letting silence settle like dew. His eyelids flicker, then open, eyes reflecting the fire's glow. He doesn't explain what is done, he doesn't need to. You've felt it in your body, the sweep of space that now seems to extend far beyond the lodge walls. The invocation of directions isn't a performance, it's a reminder that you're never truly alone. That every breath moves with the east wind or the west breeze, every heartbeat echoes both above and below. The within part hits hardest. It suggests that, yes, the universe is vast, but the most important compass point is the one you carry in your chest. Historians still argue whether early European observers correctly understood this sevenfold system or whether they flattened it into something easier to digest. Some journals describe it vaguely as prayers to the quarters, while others ignored the above, below, and within entirely, as though those were unnecessary footnotes. You get the sense that once again, the outsiders missed the heart of the ritual. The fire pops again, louder this time, and you nearly jump. The storekeeper chuckles softly, his shoulders shaking, and mutters something that sounds suspiciously like a joke only the fire got. You grin despite yourself. It's hard not to. There's something about the way humor and reverence weave together here, it never feels out of place. It's not serious mode on, jokes off. It's life, whole and balanced. You close your eyes briefly and run the pattern in your own mind: east, south, west, north, above, below, within. It feels like turning a lock. Each click opens a little more space inside you. By the time you finish, your breath has slowed without effort, your shoulders have dropped another inch, and you feel less like someone listening to a ritual and more like someone participating in it. The storekeeper lowers his hands fully now, palms resting on his knees. He exhales, long and unhurried, like a sigh after laughter. The invocation is complete, yet its echo lingers in the air, as if each direction is still present, quietly leaning in. And so the fourth calming ritual settles into you. To honor the 7 directions is to remember that balance isn't just found in one path, one goal, or one moment. Balance comes from knowing where you stand in the whole map of existence, and from carrying that compass gently inside yourself. The fire burns lower, casting long shadows across the packed earth floor. The storekeeper leans closer, his voice a whisper threaded with warmth. Listen, he says, but not to him, to what surrounds you. You tilt your head, half expecting silence. Instead, the room hums faintly with life beyond its walls. You catch the faint rustle of leaves outside, stirred by the night breeze. An owl hoots once, distant and low, followed by the quick chatter of a mockingbird practicing its night song. Somewhere farther still, you imagine the soft padding of a deer moving carefully between trees, hooves pressing moss like muted drums. It dawns on you, the animals aren't background noise here. They're part of the story. Mainstream fact: Cherokee oral tradition is rich with animal presences. The bear, for example, often symbolizes both strength and healing. The deer represents gentleness and swiftness. The mockingbird, clever and unafraid, carries songs from one world to another. These aren't cartoon mascots, they're teachers, companions, even rivals woven into the rhythm of daily life. The storykeeper takes a rattle from beside him, shaking it softly just once. The sound is earthy, hollow, like a seed pod whispering secrets. The bear listens, he says with a sly grin, so don't snore too loud. You chuckle, the sound slipping out easily. You can't help but picture a massive black bear pressing its ear against the lodge wall, raising a furry eyebrow every time you breathe too heavily. A quirky tidbit floats into memory. Some Cherokee hunters were said to apologize to animals after killing them, speaking words of thanks and sorrow. To modern ears it might sound odd, like writing a thank you card to your dinner, but it reveals a worldview where animals weren't just resources but beings with spirits deserving respect. Historians still argue whether such practices were universally held or more localized, but the sentiment is clear: no creature was taken lightly. The night air presses closer, almost as if the owl itself has shuffled nearer to listen. The mockingbird chirps again, this time weaving two notes together, and you marvel at its audacity. Even here, in the sacred hush of ritual, the bird can't resist a bit of improvisation. You grin at the thought: somewhere inside every creature lives a show-off. The storykeeper hums low in his throat, mimicking the owl's call. The sound is startlingly accurate, so much so that you half expect a feathery head to poke through the smoke hole above. He chuckles, clearly enjoying your surprise, and then switches tones, offering a quick chirp like the mockingbird. His voice shifts again, deeper, rougher, mimicking the grunt of a bear. You laugh outright now, because the bear impression is slightly too convincing, and the mental picture of him lumbering around in a bear suit is impossible to resist. Yet underneath the humor, something profound settles in. This isn't imitation, it's participation. He's not pretending to be animals, he's reminding you that stories flow through them just as much as through human mouths. The firelight flickers across his face, casting sharp lines like claw marks, then softening again as he returns to silence. You shift slightly, realizing you've been listening differently. Not just hearing sounds but letting them layer into meaning. The owl isn't background ambience, it's wisdom carried on wings. The deer is presence without intrusion. The mockingbird is laughter and mischief disguised as melody. Together, they shape a world where you're not separate from the animals, you're just another voice in the same chorus. Historians still argue whether animal roles in Cherokee storytelling were strictly symbolic or whether they represented actual observed traits. Was the bear strong in myth because the people saw it heal itself in the wild? Or did the myth shape how they interpreted the bear's behavior? Chicken and egg, or in this case, bear and berry. Either way, the lines between fact and story blur, leaving you with a picture that feels both practical and poetic. The fire crackles, the owl hoots again, and the mockingbird refuses to be outdone, chirping louder as though auditioning for a role in the story. The storykeeper glances upward, smirking. He wants credit, he says, and you laugh again, shaking your head. You realize now that humor isn't a break from reverence, it's part of it. If the animals can play their roles with both dignity and mischief, why shouldn't humans? Your eyes close briefly, letting the sounds fold around you. For a fleeting moment, You feel the bear's heavy breath at your shoulder, the deer's light step circling just behind you, the mockingbird perched unseen above. Not frightening, not intrusive, just present, like family that doesn't need to knock before entering. And so the fifth calming ritual takes root inside you. The animals are never outside the story. They are threads in the same fabric you're woven into. To listen to them is to remember you're not the center of the tale, you're simply one voice among many, humming along with the owl, the deer, the mockingbird, and perhaps, even the bear. The storykeeper sets the rattle back down, then picks up another one, this time larger, carved from a gourd mottled with age, its handle wrapped tightly in rawhide. He holds it upright for a moment, letting you study its rounded shape. In the firelight it glows amber, almost like a tiny captured moon. With a deliberate movement, he shakes it once. The sound bursts into the air, not loud, not harsh, but resonant. A hollow shimmer, seeds rattling like rainfall against a roof. He doesn't rush. Another shake, then a pause. Another, then a silence that seems longer than it is. You begin to notice the space between sounds as much as the sound itself. The rhythm is steady, hypnotic, pulling your breath into sync. You inhale as the rattle shakes, exhale as it rests. Soon, you're not even thinking about it, it's just happening. Mainstream fact, rattles made from gourds, turtle shells, or even copper were essential in Cherokee ceremonies, used to set rhythm during dances, healing, and storytelling. They weren't background instruments so much as voices themselves, calling and answering the human singers. Historians still argue whether the patterns were fixed like sheet music or improvised depending on the story, but either way, the effect was the same, rhythm held the space together. The keeper's wrist moves gently, letting the seeds roll inside the gourd. The sound is earthy, like wind moving through dry grass. You picture the seeds bouncing against the inner walls, tiny lives once capable of sprouting, now repurposed into sound. It's strangely poetic, potential turned into presence. A quirky tidbit bubbles up. Some accounts describe turtle shell rattles strapped around dancers' legs, so every step became percussion. Imagine a whole group of people moving in unison, every stomp a thunderclap, every shuffle a rustle of rain. You can't help but picture modern gyms trying to sell rattle aerobics, though here, it's not about burning calories but honoring rhythm itself. The storykeeper closes his eyes, and his shaking grows steadier, almost heartbeat-like. Thumpshish, pause. Thumpshish, pause. The fire joins in with its own crackle, the owl outside answers with a low hoot, and for a moment you realize the rhythm isn't just in the rattle, it's everywhere. It's in the animals, in the fire, in your chest. You're swimming in pulse. You catch yourself swaying slightly, shoulders rocking in time. Your foot taps against the earth before you notice it, and suddenly you're part of the rhythm too. The keeper opens one eye, smirks knowingly, and shakes the rattle again with a bit more flourish, as though teasing you into dancing. You grin, resisting the urge to stand up and stomp around the fire. Well, mostly resisting. The sound shifts suddenly. He angles the gourd differently, and the seeds rush in a long hiss, like a snake sliding across dry leaves. It startles you, makes you chuckle nervously. He chuckles too, clearly pleased with your reaction. Then he shifts again, returning to the heartbeat rhythm, calming the room once more. It feels like he just gave you a taste of both storm and stillness, reminding you that rhythm isn't always comfort, it's also surprise. Historians still argue whether rattles were reserved for elders and spiritual leaders or whether anyone could pick one up during gatherings. Some sources claim strict rules, others suggest they were passed around freely. You suspect the truth lies somewhere in between, but what matters here is the effect. The rattle becomes less an object and more a living pulse. You lean back, eyes half closed, and let the sound wash over you. Each shake sends a shimmer through the air, like invisible threads weaving the space tighter. The silences between are just as important, teaching you that calm doesn't mean endless noise or endless quiet, it means balance between the two. The keeper slows. The shakes grow farther apart, softer, until the seeds whisper instead of sing. Finally, he sets the rattle down gently, as if it might wake if dropped too quickly. The silence that follows is thick but not empty, it hums with the echo of rhythm still bouncing inside your chest. You exhale, realizing you hadn't noticed how deeply you'd sunk into that trance. Your mind feels lighter, your body looser, as though someone pressed a reset button you didn't know you had. And so the sixth calming ritual finds its place in you. Rhythm is not something to chase or force. It's already here, in your breath, in your step, in the hidden heartbeat of the world. All you need is a rattle, or sometimes nothing at all, to remind you of it. The storykeeper stretches his legs, leaning back against a log as though preparing for something more inward. He looks at you, tilts his head toward the sky, and then reaches down to pick up a small bundle of dried herbs. The leaves are crinkled and gray-green, bound together with twine that looks like it has been tightened many times over. With a flint spark, the bundle catches, smoke curling upward in thin, twisting threads. You breathe it in, tentative at first. The smell is earthy, resinous, a little bitter but strangely sweet as it settles. The smoke moves lazily through the air, painting slow shapes above the fire. You're not coughing, this isn't harsh, it's like stepping into a hidden cedar grove after a rainstorm. Mainstream fact: smoke rituals, often involving cedar, sage, or sweetgrass, were central in Cherokee and other indigenous traditions. They cleansed spaces, marked transitions, and prepared both speaker and listener for story or ceremony. But historians still argue whether specific plants were tied to particular stories, or whether it was more a matter of availability and preference. The debate doesn't matter in this moment, you're simply watching the smoke drift and realizing that the ritual is more about focus than fuel. The keeper waves the smoldering bundle gently, letting the smoke pass over himself, then over you. You almost laugh, it feels like being lightly brushed by an invisible feather. He raises his eyebrows as though daring you to sneeze, and you clamp down on the impulse, fighting back a grin. He knows. He smirks anyway. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Cherokee communities believed cedar trees held protective spirits, especially since their red heartwood seemed to resist rot. A log might outlast a whole generation, which makes you think cedar would have been the original forever battery if phones had existed back then. Imagine charging your device with a stick that smells like a forest spa. You'd never leave the woods. The smoke coils toward the ceiling of branches overhead. It seems to find paths you can't predict. One moment it drifts right, the next it spirals left. Your eyes track it unconsciously, following its slow dance. You realize you haven't blinked in a while, your gaze caught in the swirl. The keeper hums softly, a single note that rises and falls like the smoke itself. You're not sure if he's singing to the fire, to you, or to the invisible presences he invited in with the herbs. Maybe all three. The sound and the smoke mingle, weaving together like two strands of the same thread. You feel your thoughts quiet, your usual stream of to-do lists and random trivia suddenly muted. The smoke seems to carry them away, dissolving them into the night air. It's not about forgetting them forever, just setting them down, like heavy bags you don't need on this journey. There's also something undeniably calming about watching matter transform so simply. A bundle of leaves, dry and stiff, becomes curling blue-gray lines in the air, then nothing. It's a reminder that everything moves, changes, drifts. You too. The heaviness you walked in with feels like it could dissolve just as easily. Historians still argue whether smoke cleansing was primarily symbolic or whether people genuinely believed the rising tendrils carried prayers upward. From your seat by the fire, it's clear those are not mutually exclusive. The smoke can be a metaphor and a messenger at the same time. You don't need to pin it down, you just need to breathe it in. The keeper lowers the bundle, letting the last ember fade into a thread of glowing orange. He sets it carefully on a flat stone, where it smolders quietly, releasing only a faint wisp now and then. He gives a small nod, as if to say, "That's enough." Smoke doesn't need to be endless to be effective. You realize your shoulders have dropped, your jaw has unclenched, and your eyelids are heavier than before. The ritual isn't flashy, it's not supposed to be. It's just smoke, after all. But in its gentleness lies the secret. Even the most delicate thing can soften the sharp edges of your mind. You lean back further, sighing, feeling the warmth of the fire and the cool touch of the smoke. The seventh ritual has worked its way inside you, subtle, drifting, quiet. A reminder that sometimes calm doesn't arrive with a drumbeat or chant, but with something you can't even hold. Something that disappears the moment you notice it. The storykeeper lets the smoke settle into the night, then shifts his weight forward, picking up a small, flat drum. Its hide is stretched taut, the edges bound by sinew that looks like veins circling a heart. He rests it across his knees, fingers tracing its rim, then gives it one gentle tap. The sound is deep. Not loud, not booming, but felt more in your chest than in your ears. He taps again, this time letting the beat linger longer, like the echo of a distant footstep. Soon a rhythm forms, steady as the heartbeat of someone at rest. You can almost imagine lying against the earth itself, hearing the slow pulse beneath the soil. Mainstream fact: drums were central in Cherokee gatherings, carrying the beat for dances, prayers, and communal events. Unlike the flashy war drums Hollywood loves to show, these instruments were often quiet, intimate, designed to accompany rather than dominate. Historians still argue whether Cherokee drum rhythms followed strict ceremonial patterns or if each storykeeper set the pace according to mood. But sitting here, the debate doesn't matter, you're already moving with the beat. The keeper smiles faintly, noticing your shoulders rocking with the rhythm. Then, without warning, he speeds up. Tap tap tap. Your body reacts instantly, leaning forward as if pulled by invisible strings. He grins at your surprise, clearly, you've been drafted into this rhythm game. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some early observers swore that Cherokee drumming could mimic animal sounds, hoofbeats of deer, the wing beats of birds, even the roll of thunder. Imagine sitting in a clearing and suddenly realizing the sound you thought was nature was actually one clever drummer showing off. It's the 18th century version of beatboxing, and just as entertaining. The tempo shifts again, now slower, then faster, then a sudden pause. That pause catches you, it's like stepping off a curb you didn't see. Your stomach flips, and then the beat returns, grounding you again. You can't help but laugh quietly. The drum isn't just keeping rhythm, it's telling jokes. The firelight flickers in time with the beat, or maybe your brain just wants it to. Every crackle seems part of the music, every ember a tiny dancer. Even the owl outside hoots once, perfectly on beat, as if hired for percussion backup. The universe, it seems, is in the band tonight. You find yourself thinking about how calming it is to surrender to someone else's rhythm. Normally, you're the one setting your own frantic tempo emails, alarms, traffic lights. But here, the keeper sets the pace, and all you need to do is follow. It's strangely liberating. Like being a passenger in a car you know won't crash. Historians still argue whether drumming was strictly ceremonial or also recreational. But looking at the keeper's grin, you can't help but suspect it was both. Humans don't invent sound this fun just for serious occasions. Some part of it has to be play. The keeper softens the beat, slowing it down, until it matches your own breath again. Tap, pause, tap, pause. Your body leans back, shoulders loosening. The drumbeat doesn't demand anymore, it cradles. Each sound lands like a soft hand pressing against your back, steadying you. He finally stops, resting his palm flat against the hide to still the last vibration. The silence that follows feels thicker, like air after thunder. You realize the calm isn't just in the beat but also in its absence. Without it, the night feels bigger, wider, as though the stars have leaned in closer to listen. The keeper sets the drum aside with a reverence you didn't expect. To him, it's not a tool but a companion. And now, in some small way, you feel like you've been introduced. You breathe slowly, body syncing with the memory of that rhythm, even though the drum is silent now. And with that, the eighth calming ritual leaves its imprint. The pulse of another being, wood, hide, human, can steady your own. Sometimes, peace is as simple as borrowing a heartbeat not your own. The storykeeper lets the quiet rest a moment longer, then reaches for a pouch at his side. He loosens the drawstring and spills a handful of corn kernels into his palm. They glint in the firelight, some golden, some ivory, a few mottled with deep reds and blues. He rolls them between his fingers with a sound like tiny pebbles in a stream. Then he leans forward, sprinkling a small circle of them onto the ground. At first, it looks like he's just dropped a snack. But the way he arranges them, carefully, almost ceremonially, tells you this is no late-night trail mix. He nudges one kernel into place with his fingertip, then another, until a little spiral takes shape in the dirt. Mainstream fact: corn, or selu, was central to Cherokee life, both as sustenance and symbol. Ceremonies honoring it were tied to planting and harvest, with stories reminding people of the sacrifice of Selu, the corn mother, who gave her life so the people could eat. Historians still argue whether individual families kept their own small corn rituals or whether everything was centralized in larger seasonal festivals. Either way, the presence of corn here tonight isn't casual, it's essential. The keeper gestures for you to lean closer, then flicks one kernel into the fire. It crackles, pops, and disappears. He chuckles softly, as though the fire just enjoyed a snack too. You grin, suddenly imagining the flames as a mischievous guest at dinner, grabbing whatever falls from the table. Here's a quirky tidbit: some Cherokee households kept a single sacred ear of corn, hung above the hearth, not to be eaten but to watch over the home. Kind of like the original kitchen guardian. Picture a cob dangling where your smoke alarm is now, same idea, but with way more flavor. The smoke curls upward again, carrying the faint sweetness of the popped kernel. You realize corn doesn't just feed the body, it also feeds the senses. Sight, smell, sound, even the texture of kernels clicking together in the pouch, it's all part of the ritual. The keeper closes his eyes and begins to hum. This time, it's not a rhythm or a beat but something more like a lullaby. The melody rises and falls in gentle waves, and he scatters more kernels into the spiral as though punctuating each phrase. The sound and the gesture blend voice and corn, breath and earth. You're struck by how ordinary it seems, and yet how profound. He isn't holding rare incense or exotic instruments, it's just corn. The same thing you might find in a popcorn bucket at the movies. But here, in his hands, it feels elevated, as though each kernel holds a fragment of calm. Historians still argue whether these quiet household corn rituals were primarily symbolic, or if people believed the kernels themselves carried spiritual presence. Sitting here, the debate feels academic. You're watching a circle of kernels hold your attention like no glowing phone screen could. That in itself feels like power. The keeper tosses one more kernel into the fire. It pops loudly, startling you both. He laughs outright this time, slapping his knee. You can't help but laugh too, it's like the corn just delivered the punchline to a joke only the flames understood. He gestures for you to take a few kernels from the pouch. They're smooth and cool against your palm, surprisingly heavy for their size. You roll them around in your hand, feeling their solidity. Then, imitating him, you drop one into the flames. It hisses, vanishes, and for a split second you feel lighter. As though that one little kernel carried a fragment of your restless energy away with it. The circle of kernels in the dirt glimmers faintly in the firelight. Not with magic, just with the ordinary sheen of seeds waiting for a season that won't come. Still, you find yourself staring at it, mesmerized by its quiet geometry. The keeper gathers the circle back into his pouch, leaving only a faint spiral traced in the soil. He ties the drawstring with a gentle tug, as though sealing the moment inside. You lean back again, the taste of roasted corn faint on your tongue even though you never ate any. And you realize the ninth calming ritual has worked its way in, that peace can come from the humblest of things. From kernels in a pouch, spirals in the dirt, and laughter shared when one decides to pop at exactly the right moment. The storykeeper lets the fire settle into a low, steady glow, then rises slowly, joints creaking like old branches. He gestures for you to follow as he steps beyond the circle of warmth, into the cooler dark at the edge of the clearing. The grass crunches softly under your feet, and the night air feels sharper now, brushing your skin like cool silk. He lifts his hand toward the stars, and for the first time tonight, his voice rises not in chant or rhythm, but in clear words carried softly into the night. He speaks in his own tongue, syllables round and flowing, each one deliberate. You don't understand the language, but you understand the cadence. It's like listening to water ripple across stones. Mainstream fact: Cherokee prayers and invocations often addressed the spirits of nature, sun, moon, rivers, winds, as well as the Great Spirit. Some were tied to specific ceremonies, while others were spontaneous offerings. Historians still argue whether these prayers were tightly prescribed or whether storytellers had the freedom to improvise. Standing here, it feels obvious that both could be true, depending on the moment. He finishes a phrase and then falls into silence. The pause feels alive, as though the night itself is answering. Somewhere in the distance, a whippoorwill calls, its voice sharp and echoing. The keeper smiles, as though he had expected that exact reply. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some early travelers wrote, half in awe, half in confusion, that Cherokee prayers were sometimes whispered into the ear of a dog or horse, who would then be sent running into the forest as a kind of messenger. Imagine your golden retriever bounding off with your order to the cosmos, tail wagging furiously. Amazon Prime, eat your heart out. The keeper begins again, softer now, almost conversational. You notice his tone shifting, sometimes coaxing, sometimes solemn, sometimes light as though sharing a private joke with the sky. You realize prayers here aren't stiff recitations, they're relationships. They breathe. You feel a strange urge to add your own words, but you hold back, not wanting to intrude. Instead, you breathe deeply and think your own small wish. Not grand, not world-shaking, just something simple. Maybe more quiet moments like this. Maybe fewer frantic alarms in the morning. Maybe both. Historians still argue whether prayers were considered requests or more like acknowledgements. Was it asking the wind for help, or simply greeting it with respect? Listening to the keeper now, you wonder if the line between those things was never as sharp as scholars want it to be. The prayer trails off, and the keeper lowers his hand. He doesn't clap or bow or offer a grand finale. He just lets the words end, like a stream running out of stones. He exhales, and the sound fades into the grass around you. You stand there together, looking at the stars. The Milky Way stretches across the sky like a pale road, and you imagine countless prayers traveling along it, whispered by countless voices across generations. Each one small, each one fleeting, but together forming a glow that never quite disappears. The keeper finally turns back toward the fire, motioning for you to sit again. As you settle into the circle of warmth, you feel different, not because lightning struck or visions appeared, but because you were reminded that calm can come from speaking into the night without needing an answer. The 10th calming ritual leaves its gift with you. Prayer isn't about fixing or forcing. It's about making space for your own voice to join the wider chorus of the world. Sometimes the silence afterward is the best reply you could ask for. The storykeeper sits again, closer to the fire now, and begins gathering twigs and small stones into a neat pile at his feet. You watch as he arranges them not randomly but in a pattern, 2 twigs crossing, 3 stones circling, another twig angled just so. It looks simple, almost like a child's play, yet there's a deliberate rhythm to it. He pauses, studies his creation, then rearranges one piece, nodding as if satisfied. You tilt your head, realizing you've been holding your breath. It's like watching someone play a very slow game of chess with invisible opponents. Mainstream fact: Cherokee people often used small objects, sticks, stones, shells, for teaching, ritual, or even games. Stickball, for example, was both sport and sacred contest, linked to balance and community. Historians still argue whether some of these smaller, quieter object games were purely recreational or also carried ceremonial weight. Sitting here, it feels like the line doesn't matter, the act itself is calming either way. The keeper gestures for you to try. He slides a few pebbles toward you, their surfaces warm from the fire. You place them down clumsily, trying to mimic his pattern. Yours looks less like a sacred design and more like a pile you'd kick absent-mindedly on a sidewalk. He chuckles, but not unkindly. He rearranges one pebble, then another, and suddenly your messy scatter looks intentional. You blink, surprised. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some stories suggest children once learned clan relationships and tribal teachings through object patterns, almost like 3-dimensional mnemonics. Imagine flashcards, but with rocks and twigs, and way cooler illustrations if you asked a 7-year-old. You find yourself oddly absorbed. Each pebble placement feels like a decision, not random at all. Should this one lean closer to the firelight? Should that twig angle toward the circle's edge? The keeper doesn't correct you now, he lets you discover your own rhythm. The simple act of choosing where to place an object becomes meditative. Historians still argue whether these arrangements were meant to symbolize cosmic order, animal tracks, or simple stories. Watching your little spiral take shape, you think it could be all of them, depending on what you choose to see. Maybe meaning itself is the ritual layered onto the objects by whoever touches them. The keeper claps softly, a single sound that seems to seal your arrangement in place. You smile, unexpectedly proud of your lopsided circle of stones. Not because it's perfect, it isn't, but because it now carries your attention, your breath, your care. The night deepens, firelight softening the edges of every twig and stone. You lean back, staring at the simple design you made, and realize your thoughts have slowed. No anxious loops, no sudden intrusions, just focus on a tiny patch of ground and the objects within it. The keeper gathers the stones again, sweeping them gently back into the earth. He doesn't mourn their disappearance, he treats it like the natural closing of a small performance. It reminds you of mandalas made from sand, beautiful and temporary, teaching that impermanence can be soothing rather than frightening. You feel a faint urge to recreate the design yourself, but you stop. Maybe the point is that it happened once and doesn't need repeating. And so the 11th calming ritual makes itself known. Calm is found in arranging the ordinary, giving meaning to pebbles and twigs. The act is both fleeting and grounding. You realize you may never look at a handful of gravel the same way again. The storykeeper lets the stones rest where they fell, then leans closer to the fire, his eyes catching the glow. Without a word, he begins to whistle, soft, airy, not a tune you recognize, but a wandering line of notes rising and dipping like a bird testing the wind. At first it sounds almost accidental, the way someone might whistle absent-mindedly while sweeping. But then you notice the precision, the pause before each shift in pitch, the way certain notes linger as though feeding the flames themselves. The firelight seems to flicker in rhythm, as though keeping time with his breath. Mainstream fact: Cherokee music wasn't confined to drums and rattles. Flutes and whistles carved from river cane or bone carried melodies across valleys, often used in courtship or storytelling. Their sound was said to mimic birds, rivers, or even the sigh of wind. Historians still argue whether these melodies were passed down intact or if each keeper improvised. Tonight, it feels like both truths could live in the same breath. The tune changes, dipping lower, and suddenly an owl answers from the trees. You jolt, half laughing, half spooked. The keeper doesn't flinch, he just smiles, as though he expected the duet. He trills a high note, and in the pause that follows, a whippoorwill cries again. It feels like the entire forest has slipped into the performance. Here's a quirky tidbit. There are accounts of flutes being carved with holes spaced to mimic the spacing of a lover's hand. Imagine explaining that at a modern music store. Yes, I'll take the Romance Edition flute, pre-measured, thank you. The whistling continues, and you realize something odd. It's calming not because it's predictable, but because it's alive. Each note surprises you slightly, yet you trust the sound, letting it guide your breath. You inhale when the pitch rises, exhale when it falls. Soon your lungs are pacing themselves to a melody that didn't exist a minute ago. Historians still argue whether music like this was sacred or secular. But your ears don't care about categories. They care about the way your chest loosens, the way your shoulders drift down with each sighing note. The fire pops suddenly, sending up a spray of sparks, and the keeper incorporates it into his tune, matching its sharp crack with a quick, high whistle. You chuckle, now even the fire's in the band. For a moment, you imagine a forest orchestra, owl percussion, cricket strings, wind section courtesy of the trees. The keeper, naturally, is conductor. The tune winds down, each phrase shorter than the last, like footsteps fading down a long hall. Finally, he releases one final, trembling note that dissolves into silence so seamless you're not sure when it ended. You sit there blinking, almost disappointed the sound is gone. Then you realize you're still hearing it in your mind, echoing faintly like the memory of a dream. That's the trick, it lingers without lingering, leaving just enough to soothe you long after it's finished. The keeper rests his hands on his knees and exhales through his nose, content. He doesn't need applause. The night itself seems to have applauded already, with owls and whippoorwills and sparks of fire joining in. You stretch, shoulders rolling, breath steady, mind clearer than it was when the whistling began. And you recognize the 12th calming ritual for what it is. Sometimes peace comes not from silence alone, but from giving silence a shape. A song that isn't written, a whistle that vanishes the moment it's born, yet still manages to steady your heart long after. The storykeeper leans back, gaze drifting past the fire toward the dark edge of the woods. For a while, he says nothing, letting the night's noises fill the space, the crickets, the distant rushing of water, the occasional pop of the fire. Then, almost casually, he points to the sky. Your eyes follow, and you notice how clear the stars are tonight. They scatter across the heavens in sharp points of silver, stretching so far you feel like you could fall upward into them. The Milky Way arches faintly, a pale smear like smoke from an ancient fire. He begins tracing shapes with his finger, not in the rigid lines you'd see on a planetarium map, but in arcs and loops, more fluid, more alive. He murmurs words under his breath, pointing from one star to the next. You don't catch the names, but you feel the rhythm of the pointing, each gesture carrying story, not just astronomy. Mainstream fact: the Cherokee held star knowledge that linked constellations to animals, hunting seasons, and ceremonial times. One important figure was the Uctina, the great serpent, whose coils were said to stretch across the sky. Historians still argue whether Cherokee star lore was primarily practical navigation or deeply spiritual cosmology. Tonight, it feels like both at once, the sky a map of hunting grounds and of mysteries. The keeper chuckles and points toward a cluster of stars. He makes a slithering motion with his hand, as though imitating a snake. Then he points again, this time outlining a shape more like a bear. You squint, tilting your head, and realize you can see it. Kind of. Maybe. The firelight tricks your eyes, but soon the stars connect in your imagination. You can't help but grin. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some traditions, the Pleiades cluster, tiny, faint stars, was said to be children who played so much they floated into the sky. A cosmic version of go play outside and don't come back until dinner. Apparently, they never came back. The keeper gestures at the Pleiades now, nodding knowingly, as though confirming the tale. You imagine those star children laughing endlessly above, still playing tag after 1,000 years. There's something comforting in that. He keeps tracing more shapes, his finger weaving connections across the black canvas. Each new outline feels like a story half told, something you can almost grasp but not quite. And maybe that's the point. The stars don't hand over their secrets, they invite you to imagine them. Historians still argue whether star stories were memorized word for word or if storytellers improvised depending on the audience. Watching The Keeper, you suspect the answer is yes. Both. The skeleton is there, but the muscles shift with each telling. As he lowers his hand, you find yourself still staring upward, eyes darting from point to point, connecting dots into shapes of your own. Not all of them make sense, but they make you smile. One cluster looks suspiciously like a slice of pizza, which you're fairly certain the Cherokee didn't name, though it feels important in its own way. The longer you stare, the calmer you feel. The sky doesn't move quickly, it asks you to slow down to its pace. The stars remind you that your small worries are just that, small. Fleeting. Dust beneath a sky that has been spinning long before you and will keep spinning long after. The keeper pats your shoulder, then points back to the fire, reminding you gently that even while your gaze wanders upward, your body still lives here on the ground. You nod, smiling, carrying both directions inside you, the infinite above, the steady warmth below. And so the 13th calming ritual finds its way into you, to trace the sky, to let your imagination travel along the ancient paths drawn by firelight and stars. To remember that peace sometimes comes not from solving mysteries, but from staring into them until your heart slows enough to match their stillness. The storykeeper leans forward, his hands clasped loosely, and his voice softens. He tells you that sometimes, the most calming ritual isn't in looking outward to the stars or listening to drums, but in turning inward toward your own breath. You're skeptical. Breathing? That's just what you already do, all day, every day. But he shakes his head slowly, smiling as if you've said something obvious yet amusing, like complaining that water is too wet. He places his palm against his chest and closes his eyes. You notice how his shoulders rise and fall with deliberate rhythm, like waves rolling in. He gestures for you to try. You mimic him: inhale, hold, exhale. Your first attempt feels awkward, like forcing yourself into a posture that doesn't belong to you. But you keep at it, syncing with his pace, letting the inhale stretch just a second longer than usual, letting the exhale drag out like a sigh of relief you've been holding for years. Mainstream fact: Cherokee ceremonial practices often included what modern wellness guides would call mindful breathing. It was tied to prayer, to centering before rituals, and to focusing the body's energy. Quirky tidbit: some healers described breath as a visible thread connecting you to the spirit world, so if you sneezed, it was considered a moment of spiritual vulnerability. Kind of explains why saying bless you took on serious vibes. You breathe again. This time it feels less forced. The air enters cool, expands your chest, then leaves in a slow warmth. The fire crackles in front of you, syncing its rhythm to your breath. The crickets seem to chirp in time, as though the whole night is joining your practice. Historians still argue whether Cherokee breath rituals were taught in formal settings or passed down casually within families. Sitting here, you sense it didn't really matter. The simplicity was the teaching. You don't need a lecture on lungs. You need to feel the pause between inhale and exhale, the strange comfort of nothingness in that gap. Your mind, which a moment ago was darting around like a restless squirrel, begins to slow. With each breath, it feels like leaves floating to the ground, settling one by one. Even your little anxieties, did you forget to lock the door? Did you overshare in that last group chat? Drift away. Breath in, breath out. The storykeeper opens his eyes, gives you a knowing nod, and quietly hums, almost imperceptible. You realize the hum isn't for melody but for vibration. It resonates in his chest, echoing through his breathing. You copy him, your hum awkward at first, but soon you feel the buzz in your ribs, in your throat, humming as though you're a tuning fork struck gently by the universe. Something about it feels ancient and silly at the same time. Ancient, because it clearly grounds you. Silly, because you suddenly imagine explaining this to your friends. Yeah, I just hummed myself into serenity. But hey, it works. The night presses close, but not in a suffocating way. More like a blanket wrapping you in calm. You realize you've been tricked. Breathing isn't just a thing you do unconsciously. When done with awareness, it becomes a doorway. A portal to that subtle place where the noise in your mind finally quiets. The storykeeper finally chuckles, like he's read your thoughts. He tells you, not with words but with his calm presence, sometimes the greatest rituals are the smallest ones. The ones you forget you already know. And so you sit there, breathing, humming, smiling at how easy peace can be when you let it. The 14th ritual has settled in your bones, not an elaborate dance or mythic tale, but the steady gift of breath, grounding you in the here and now. The fire is lower now, just a bed of glowing coals pulsing with quiet life. The storykeeper sits back, shoulders loose, face softened by the ember light. He doesn't rush into another tale. Instead, he lets the silence stretch, as if silence itself is the final ritual. You shift a little, but then lean into it, realizing how rare this feels, to sit without needing to fill the air with words. The quiet grows so deep that you start hearing things you usually miss. The faint whoosh of your own pulse in your ears. The tiny shift of fabric when you move. The subtle hiss of air escaping one of the coals. The night is not empty, it's alive with detail, just softer, slower. Mainstream fact, in Cherokee tradition, silence had ceremonial weight. Pauses weren't gaps but spaces of meaning, a time to listen for what wasn't spoken. Quirky tidbit, some elders believed that if you filled every silence with chatter, you left no room for spirits to whisper wisdom. Which, when you think about it, makes awkward silence suddenly feel like missed opportunities for cosmic emails. Historians still argue whether silence was formally taught as a ritual or if it was simply lived and honored until it became inseparable from ceremony. Either way, here it holds power. You realize the night doesn't demand your attention, it offers it freely, if you're willing to sit still long enough. The storykeeper eventually hums low, just a single note that seems to echo inside the silence instead of breaking it. He closes his eyes, and you follow, sinking into the rhythm of nothingness. It feels strange, and then wonderful, like discovering that the quiet has texture, like soft moss beneath your fingers. The embers glow, the stars hover, your breath slows, and the silence itself becomes the 15th ritual, the one that gathers all the others, weaves them together, and places them in your chest where they belong. You don't need to do anything now. Just be. And now, as the coals dim further, you feel the journey winding down. The rituals have settled into you, not as a list to memorize, but as gentle impressions, drums in the night, cedar smoke, whispered star maps, stories curling like wood smoke, and silence that hums like the earth's own heartbeat. Your body feels heavier, your mind softer. The storykeeper fades from focus, not because he leaves, but because his presence has seeped into you. His lessons were never meant to stay outside, they were meant to live in your breath, your gaze, your laughter, your stillness. The forest cradles you. The stars stretch overhead, but they no longer feel unreachable, they feel like old friends nodding from a distance. The coals sink lower still, flickering faintly, reminding you that even when the fire rests, warmth lingers. You notice how your thoughts have slowed. Where earlier they darted like restless birds, now they drift like feathers, falling into a soft, welcoming bed. Nothing feels urgent. Nothing presses on you. There is only this, quiet, steady, safe. So let yourself sink deeper into that calm. Let your eyelids grow heavier with every slow breath. Let the silence wrap you, not as emptiness but as comfort. You've walked through rituals of balance, story, laughter, and breath, and now you rest in the space they all point toward peace. Sleep will come gently, like a story that doesn't end but simply fades into dreams. And when you wake, the rituals may whisper to you again, not as commands, but as companions, always nearby. So close your eyes. Breathe once more. And drift.